It started on a cold, gray afternoon in Seattle. A young veterinarian said no to the wrong man. Her dog stepped forward to protect her, and in a single moment of cruelty, everything changed. The man laughed. He had money, power, a famous last name. He believed fear was something he could give freely, especially to those who couldn't fight back. But what he didn't know was that someone was watching. A quiet man sitting on a park bench. A man who didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, and didn't run. Because some guardians don't announce themselves. They step in only when the line is crossed. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Seattle was already soaked long before the rain began to fall. By late afternoon, the city sat under a thick blanket of low clouds, heavy and unmoving. The rain came steadily, not hard enough to force people indoors, but persistent enough to drain warmth from the body and patience from the mind. Streets reflected dull light. The air smelled of wet concrete and salt drifting in from the bay. No one complained. In Seattle, the weather was not a problem to solve. It was something to endure. Discovery Park lay quiet at the city's edge, its narrow trails winding through dense evergreens toward the water. Mud clung to boots and slowed footsteps. The trees muffled sound, leaving only the rain and the wind moving through branches. Eleanor Brooks walked carefully along one of the paths, her grip firm on the leash in her right hand. Ellie was 26, average in height, slim but strong from years of physical work. Her green parka showed signs of use. Darkened cuffs, a loose seam at the pocket. Mud splashed up the sides of her boots. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a low knot beneath a gray knit beanie, strands damp against pale skin. Her face was calm but tired, the expression of someone used to responsibility and short on rest. At her side walked Ash. Ash was a 4-year-old Alaskan Malamute, large and solid, built for cold and endurance. His thick gray and white coat was heavy with rain, his tail low and still. His pale eyes stayed alert, scanning the trail ahead and behind. A faint scar marked his right shoulder, hidden beneath fur unless the light caught it just right. He moved close to Ellie, steady and quiet, matching her pace. Ellie slowed near a small clearing where the trees opened slightly toward the sound of water. She stopped and rested a hand briefly on Ash's neck. "One more minute," she said softly. Ash did not respond, but he did not relax either. Laughter carried down the trail behind them. It was loud and careless, out of place in the muted park. Ellie straightened. Ash lifted his head. 3 men approached, walking easily despite the mud. Their boots were clean. The man in front was younger than the others, late 20s, lean and well-groomed. His dark hair was slicked back, his face smooth and confident. He wore a black jacket that looked expensive and impractical for the weather. His name was Logan Pierce. Logan's eyes lingered on Ellie as he slowed to a stop. The 2 men behind him stayed quiet, broader, older, positioned just far enough back to watch. "That's a big dog," Logan said. Ellie did not turn fully toward him. "He's trained," she replied evenly. "Please give us space." Logan stepped closer instead. "Trained doesn't mean harmless." Ash moved forward without a sound, placing himself between Ellie and Logan. His head lowered slightly, his body stiffened. A low warning came from his chest, controlled but clear. Logan hesitated, then scoffed. "Control your dog." "We're leaving," Ellie said, tightening her grip on the leash as she tried to move around him. Logan reached out and grabbed her sleeve. The sudden pressure made Ellie freeze. "Let go," she said, her voice sharp now. Ash lunged. The leash snapped tight as Ellie struggled to hold him back. Ash snarled, teeth flashing. Logan jerked his hand away, anger rising fast. "You think that scares me?" Before Ellie could react, Logan pulled his leg back and kicked. The blow struck Ash hard in the ribs. Ash cried out and collapsed into the mud, breath knocked from his lungs. He struggled to inhale, chest rising unevenly. Ellie dropped to her knees beside him. "Ash!" Her hands moved quickly over his side, searching for injury, fear tightening her chest. Logan stepped back, adjusting his jacket. "That's what happens when animals forget their place," he said, dismissive. The rain continued to fall. Several yards away, a man stood up from a bench overlooking the trail. Caleb Hart was 34, tall and solid, his build compact and efficient. His hair was cut short and uneven. his jaw rough with stubble. He wore a plain jacket and jeans, both soaked through. His posture was relaxed, but his attention was sharp. Caleb had come to the park for quiet. He was on mandatory leave, told to slow down after months of constant tension and poor sleep. He had no intention of getting involved in anything. The sound of a dog crying changed that. He walked toward them, unhurried but deliberate. Logan noticed him and laughed. "This isn't your business." Caleb stopped a few feet away. His hands were visible at his sides. His voice was calm and steady. "You shouldn't have done that." Logan reached into his jacket and pulled out a silver handgun. Ellie gasped. Caleb did not move. The rain fell steadily as the moment stretched, quiet and dangerous. And somewhere between one breath and the next, the afternoon crossed a line that could not be taken back. The gun did not look real at first. It was too clean, too reflective, its silver surface catching what little light slipped through the clouds. Logan Pierce held it with one hand, elbow bent, wrist loose, as if it were an accessory rather than a weapon. His finger hovered near the trigger, not quite settled, betraying inexperience beneath the confidence. Ellie felt her breath lock in her chest. The world narrowed to the barrel of the gun, to Ash's labored breathing at her knees, to the sound of rain striking leaves and mud, as if nothing else had changed. Her hands were still pressed to Ash's side, warm with his body heat, slick with rain. She did not move. She was afraid that if she did, something irreversible would happen. Caleb Hart noticed all of this in fragments. He registered the weapon first. The grip angle, the way Logan's shoulders were squared more toward dominance than balance, the slight tremor in his hand. He noted the distance between them, the uneven ground, the slope of the trail. He saw Ellie kneeling, her posture instinctively protective, and the dog struggling for breath, ribs expanding unevenly. None of it surprised him. Violence, once it surfaced, followed patterns. Logan smiled, thin and brittle. "Last chance," he said. "Walk away." Caleb did not raise his voice. "Put it down," he said, not as a request, as information. One of the men behind Logan shifted his weight. This one was tall and broad, with a shaved head and a beard cut close to the skin, dark and coarse. His name was Victor Hale, though few people used it. He had the look of a man who had once been strong for the right reasons, and had since settled for being strong for hire. His eyes flicked between Caleb and the gun, calculating. The other man, shorter and heavier, stayed where he was. He had a thick neck, pale skin flushed from the cold, and a nose that had been broken more than once. He did not like uncertainty, and it showed in the way his jaw tightened. Logan ignored them both. "You think you're brave?" he said to Caleb. "You don't even know who I am." Caleb took one slow step forward. Logan's grip tightened. His finger twitched. That was enough. Caleb moved. It was not dramatic. There was no leap, no shout. He closed the distance in 2 quick steps, his left hand striking Logan's wrist from the side, redirecting the barrel just as the trigger was pulled. The shot cracked loud and sharp, the sound echoing through the trees. Bark splintered from a nearby trunk where the bullet buried itself. Before Logan could react, Caleb's right hand clamped down over the top of the slide, and Logan's knuckles, twisting hard. There was a sound like thick branches snapping. Logan screamed. The gun fell into the mud, useless, as Caleb drove Logan backward with controlled force, using his weight and momentum rather than strength alone. Logan hit the ground hard, breath exploding out of him, his wrist bent at an angle it was never meant to reach. Caleb dropped a knee into Logan's shoulder, pinning him flat, one hand pressing between his shoulder blades, the other already moving. Caleb stripped at the weapon quickly, magazine out, slide back. Chamber cleared. The pieces landed in the mud several feet apart. "Don't move," Caleb said. His voice was steady, unraised. Victor took a step forward. Up close, he looked older than his build suggested, crow's feet etched deep at the corners of his eyes. His beard was flecked with gray. "Easy," he said, palms out. "He's done." Caleb looked up at him. There was no anger in his eyes, only focus. "Then back away." Victor hesitated. He glanced at Logan, still screaming curses into the wet ground, then at the broken gun. He raised his hands higher and stepped back without another word. The shorter man followed, less convinced, but unwilling to test what he had just seen. The trail had gone silent. People who had been walking nearby stood frozen at a distance, phones half raised, unsure whether to record or run. Someone shouted that the police were on their way. Ellie barely heard it. Caleb released Logan only long enough to roll him onto his stomach, pressing his face into the mud to stop the flailing. Logan sobbed now, the rage draining into panic and pain. "You broke my hand," he gasped. "Do you know who my father is?" Caleb did not answer. Ellie finally found her voice. "Ash," she said again, quieter now. She leaned closer, listening to his breathing, feeling the rise and fall under her hands. He was still wheezing, but the rhythm was evening out. Pain, not collapse. Relief came sharp and sudden, leaving her hands shaking. Ash's eyes flicked toward Caleb. His ears twitched. Despite the pain, his tail thumped once weakly against the mud. Sirens cut through the rain. 2 police cruisers arrived fast, tires spraying water as they skidded to a stop near the trailhead. Officers spilled out, hands on weapons, scanning the scene. One of them, a tall man with a lined face and thinning hair beneath his cap, took in the broken gun, the man on the ground, the injured dog. His name badge read Sergeant Daniel Reeves. Reeves had been on the force for nearly 25 years. His shoulders sagged slightly beneath his jacket, and his movements were careful, measured. He had learned long ago which battles were his and which were not. "What's going on here?" Reeves asked. Logan lifted his head, face streaked with mud and tears. "He attacked me," he shouted. "I was threatened. Arrest him." Caleb stood slowly and stepped back, hands open, away from Logan. "He kicked her dog and pulled a gun," he said. "There are witnesses." Reeves looked from Caleb to Ellie, then to the bystanders gathered along the trail. He saw nods, heard murmurs of agreement. Then his eyes returned to Logan, and recognition flickered. Logan saw it too. His breathing hitched, then steadied. "Call my father," he said. "Now." Reeves exhaled through his nose. His jaw tightened. He turned slightly toward Caleb and lowered his voice. "You should go," he said. "Take her and the dog." Caleb frowned. "He fired a weapon." "I know," Reeves replied, "but this isn't going to go the way you think it will." Ellie looked up sharply. "You can't be serious." Reeves met her eyes, and for a moment something like regret passed across his face. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you need to get your dog medical attention." Logan laughed weakly. "That's right," he said. "Get them out of here." Caleb held Reeves's gaze for a long second. Then he nodded once. Not agreement. Understanding. He turned to Ellie. "Can you stand?" She nodded, swallowing hard. Together they helped Ash to his feet. He limped, but stayed upright, leaning into Ellie and Caleb both. As they walked away from the trail, the rain seemed heavier, colder. Ellie did not look back. She did not need to. They reached Ellie's car, an old station wagon parked near the lot. Caleb opened the back door and helped Ash inside, lifting carefully, mindful of the ribs. Ash settled with a low groan, then went still. Ellie sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting uselessly in her lap. "That was Logan Pierce," she said finally. "His father owns half the docks, half the unions. People don't cross them." Caleb closed the door gently. "Then he shouldn't have crossed you." She looked at him, really looked at him, rain dripping from his jacket, his expression unreadable. "They won't let this go." Caleb nodded. "Neither will I." The engine started. The wipers swept back and forth, pushing water aside. And somewhere behind them, in the mud of Discovery Park, a line had been drawn. The rain stayed with them all the way out of Discovery Park, thinning but never fully stopping, as if Seattle itself were unwilling to release what had been set in motion. Ellie drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel, eyes fixed forward, shoulders rigid. The windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm, sweeping away water that returned just as quickly. Ash lay curled in the back, his massive body pressed awkwardly against the side of the car, breathing shallow but steady. Every so often, a low sound escaped his throat, not a whine, just a reminder that he was hurting. Caleb sat in the passenger seat, silent. His jacket was still damp, his hands resting loosely on his thighs, but his attention never drifted. He watched the side mirrors, the cars behind them, the reflections of headlights sliding across wet pavement. Old habits resurfaced easily. He did not question them. Ellie broke the silence first. "My clinic isn't far," she said, her voice controlled but thin. "Ballard, it's small, but I have what I need." Caleb nodded. "Tell me where to turn." They drove through narrow streets lined with old houses and closed storefronts. The neighborhood felt quieter than the park, but not safer, the kind of quiet that came from people keeping to themselves. Ellie parked beside a converted brick building, with a faded sign above the door, Brooks Veterinary Care. The windows were dark. A single light glowed faintly inside. Caleb was out of the car before the engine fully stopped. He opened the back door carefully. Ash tried to stand on his own, stubborn as ever, but his legs shook. Caleb slid an arm under his chest and another beneath his hindquarters, lifting with practiced care. Ash weighed close to 80 pounds, but Caleb adjusted easily, muscles engaging without strain. Ash grumbled softly but did not resist, his head resting briefly against Caleb's shoulder. Inside, the clinic smelled of disinfectant and old wood. It was warm, a relief, after the cold rain. The space was modest, a reception desk, 2 chairs, shelves lined with bottles and folders. Behind a half door lay the exam room, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed faintly. Ellie moved quickly, shedding her parka, washing her hands at the sink with brisk efficiency. Whatever fears she had carried from the park receded beneath training and routine. She examined Ash's ribs carefully, fingers probing with controlled pressure, watching his reaction closely. "He's bruised," she said after a moment. "Possibly a small fracture. No internal bleeding that I can feel. He's lucky." Caleb exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Ellie prepared an injection and administered it smoothly. Ash tensed, then relaxed, his breathing evening out as the medication took hold. She wrapped his torso carefully, securing the bandage with practiced movements. When she finished, her hands finally began to tremble. She stepped back, leaning against the counter, closing her eyes for a brief second. "That could have gone so much worse." Caleb nodded. "It didn't." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Under the harsh clinic lights, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes more clearly, the faint scar along his left forearm where his sleeve had ridden up. He looked calm, but not relaxed, like someone waiting for a second impact. "They won't leave this alone," Ellie said quietly. "Logan Pierce doesn't lose in public." Caleb moved to the window and pulled the blind aside just enough to look out. The street was empty, slick with rain, streetlights reflecting in long streaks across the asphalt. "I know." Ellie hesitated, then spoke again. "You should go. This isn't your fight." Caleb didn't turn around. "It already is." A car passed slowly outside, tires hissing on wet pavement. Caleb watched until its taillights disappeared. An hour later, the sound of an engine idling cut through the quiet. Caleb stiffened instantly. He lowered the blind fully and moved closer to the door, his body positioning itself between the entrance and the exam room without conscious thought. Ellie noticed the shift and followed his gaze. A black sedan sat at the curb. It was spotless, its surface gleaming under the streetlight. The engine purred softly, controlled, expensive. The rear door opened. Miles Pierce stepped out. He was in his early 60s, tall and thin, his posture straight despite his age. His hair was silver and neatly combed back, his beard trimmed close, outlining a sharp jawline. He wore a charcoal overcoat that fit him perfectly, the fabric heavy and elegant. His face was calm, almost pleasant, but his eyes were cold, observant in a way that missed nothing and forgave less. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed. 2 men flanked him. They moved differently than Logan's bodyguards, more disciplined, more aware of their surroundings. One was broad and clean-shaven, the other lean with a dark beard and narrow eyes. They scanned the street methodically, hands clasped loosely in front of them. Miles Pierce walked to the clinic door and knocked once. Caleb opened it before Ellie could stop him. "We're closed," Caleb said. Miles smiled slightly. "I know." His voice was smooth, unhurried. "I wanted to speak with you." Caleb didn't move aside. "You have." Miles glanced past him, toward the exam room. "My son is impulsive," he said calmly. "He makes mistakes." "He kicked a dog and pulled a gun," Caleb replied. Miles nodded as if acknowledging a minor inconvenience. "And you broke his wrist, publicly. That creates problems." Caleb stepped closer, close enough that Miles had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. "Then teach him better." For the first time, the smile faded. Miles reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Thick, white. He held it out between them. "This covers medical expenses," he said, "and compensation for the distress caused, for both of you." Caleb didn't take it. "This city works on balance," Miles continued. "You disrupted that balance today." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Your balance hurts people." Miles studied him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not from here," he said. "You don't understand how long memories can be." Ellie stepped into view behind Caleb. "Leave," she said, her voice steady. Miles looked at her, really looked, and something like annoyance flickered across his face. "You should choose your allies carefully," he said. Caleb leaned in slightly. "You should choose your threats carefully." The air between them tightened. One of the guards shifted his stance. Miles exhaled, slow and controlled. He tucked the envelope back into his coat. "We'll speak again," he said quietly, "whether you want to or not." He turned and walked back to the car. The door closed, softly. The sedan pulled away, leaving the street empty once more. Ellie's knees felt weak. She sat down hard on the edge of the exam table. "That was Miles Pierce." "I know," Caleb said. "They ruin people," she whispered. "Careers, lives." Caleb checked the door lock, then the window latches. "Then we don't give them the chance." Later that night, after Ellie had gone upstairs to her small apartment above the clinic, Caleb stayed behind. He moved through the darkened space quietly, testing hinges, tightening screws, bracing a weak section of the back door with a heavy metal cabinet. He scattered a handful of empty glass vials beneath the rear window, an improvised alarm. Ash stirred once, lifting his head groggily. Caleb knelt beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You did good," he murmured. Ash's tail thumped weakly. Outside, the rain finally slowed, but the air felt heavier than before. This wasn't over. It was only settling into place. Night settled over Ballard without ceremony. The rain eased into a fine mist, barely visible under the streetlights. But the cold deepened, the kind of cold that crept through seams in old buildings and reminded people how thin walls really were. The clinic stood quiet at the corner of the block, its brick exterior darkened by moisture, the sign above the door unlit. From the outside, it looked like any other closed storefront. Inside, nothing felt settled. Caleb remained awake. He moved through the clinic slowly, deliberately, listening more than looking. Every sound carried weight now: the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of wood as the building cooled, the distant rush of a car passing several streets away. He checked the locks again, then the back entrance, testing the cabinet he had wedged against it. Solid. He crouched near the rear window, examining the glass, noting where it would give if struck hard enough. Old construction, strong frame, weak pane. Ash lay in the exam room, sedated but conscious, his large body rising and falling steadily. The bandage around his ribs was snug and clean. His eyes opened briefly when Caleb approached, pale and alert despite the medication. Caleb knelt beside him and rested a hand on his shoulder. Ash's tail thumped once against the floor, slow but deliberate. Upstairs, Ellie paced her small apartment. She had changed into old sweatpants and a sweater, but the clothes did nothing to loosen the tight knot in her chest. Every creak made her stop. Every passing headlight sent a flicker of light across the ceiling. She told herself she was being paranoid, but the image of Miles Pierce standing calmly at her door refused to fade. She descended the stairs quietly. Caleb looked up as she entered the clinic, his posture shifting slightly, protective without being obvious. "You should try to sleep," he said. Ellie shook her head. "I can't." Caleb nodded, accepting it without comment. "Then make coffee." She did. The smell filled the room, grounding her. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the day settling between them. The first sign of trouble was not noise, it was absence. Caleb noticed it immediately. The steady hum of the refrigerator cut out, plunging the clinic into sudden quiet. The lights flickered once, then died completely. Darkness filled the room, thick and immediate. Ellie froze. "The power—" "Stay where you are," Caleb said softly. He moved without hesitation, stepping into the shadows near the exam room, his breathing slowing, his body aligning with the space. Darkness was not an obstacle. It was cover. Outside, glass shattered. The rear window gave way with a sharp crack, followed by the soft scatter of fragments hitting the floor. A shadow slipped through the opening, then another. Boots crunched on glass. 3 men entered through the back. They moved cautiously, weapons low, scanning the dark. These were not street thugs. Their movements were measured, practiced. One was tall and lean, his hair pulled back into a tight knot, beard trimmed close along sharp cheekbones. His face was angular, scarred lightly along the jaw. His name was Aaron Klein, though the men who worked with him called him Klein. Former military, discharged early after an incident overseas that never quite made the reports. Since then, he sold his skills to whoever paid best. Behind him came 2 others. One was stocky, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a permanent scowl etched into his face. The other was younger, clean-shaven, nervous in the way men were when they knew they were in over their heads. They fanned out, quiet, efficient. Caleb waited until the first man stepped onto the scattered glass vials. The crunch echoed sharply in the stillness. Before Klein could react, Caleb moved. He closed the distance fast, striking the stocky man first with a hard blow to the side of the neck. The man collapsed without a sound. Caleb pivoted, grabbing the younger man by the shoulder and driving him into the exam table, knocking the breath from his lungs. The man went down, gasping. Klein turned, weapon raised. Ash barked. The sound was sudden, explosive, filling the room. Despite the pain, Ash surged forward, slamming his weight into Klein's legs. Klein stumbled, balance broken for a split second. It was all Caleb needed. He struck Klein's wrist, sending the weapon skidding across the floor, then drove him backward into the wall, forearm pressing into his throat. Klein struggled briefly, then went still, eyes wide, calculating. "Who sent you?" Caleb asked quietly. Klein didn't answer. He didn't need to. Caleb knocked him unconscious with a sharp, controlled blow. Ellie emerged from behind the counter, shaking but upright. She stared at the three men on the floor, her breath coming fast. "They came here," she said. "They really came." Caleb nodded. "This was a test." Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing closer. Someone nearby must have heard the glass break. Caleb moved quickly, dragging the men back toward the broken window. He propped the stocky one against the wall and splashed cold water on his face. The man groaned, eyes fluttering open. "Tell Pierce," Caleb said, his voice low and steady. "This place is not unguarded." The man nodded frantically. They were gone before the police arrived, limping into the mist. When the officers showed up, they asked questions, took notes, and filed a report. They did not search far. They did not linger. Ellie noticed how quickly they left. When the clinic was quiet again, the broken window boarded up temporarily, the power restored, Ellie sank into a chair. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't live like this." Caleb crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. "You're not alone," he said, "but this doesn't end by hiding." Ash limped over and rested, his head against Ellie's knee. She buried her fingers in his fur, grounding herself in his warmth. Outside, the night pressed in, heavier than before. The walls had held, but the message was clear. This was no longer a warning, it was a declaration. Morning arrived slowly, filtered through low clouds that dulled the light and flattened sound. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the street outside the clinic slick and reflective. Ballard looked calm in the early hours, as if nothing had happened. That calm felt false. Caleb had not slept. He sat at the small desk in the reception area, a mug of cold coffee untouched beside him, eyes fixed on the dark window. Ash lay nearby on a padded mat, awake now, pain dulled but present. The Malamute shifted occasionally, adjusting his weight carefully, his thick fur still faintly smelling of antiseptic. Ellie had finally gone upstairs near dawn, exhaustion overtaking fear, but sleep had come unevenly. Caleb listened to the building. Old pipes rattled softly as heat moved through them. Somewhere nearby, a door opened and closed. Normal sounds, but none of them eased the tension. The attack the night before had been deliberate, not reckless, not loud. Someone had planned it, measured the response, then pulled back. That meant it wasn't over. At 8:30, the front door opened. Caleb rose instantly, posture tightening. Ash lifted his head, ears pricking forward. The man who stepped inside moved carefully, as if aware he was entering a space already on edge. He was in his early 40s, average height, lean rather than muscular. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, cut short but uneven, and a trimmed beard framed a narrow face marked by deep lines around the eyes. He wore a brown jacket over a plain shirt and jeans, unremarkable except for how he carried himself. Alert, watchful, not surprised by what he saw. "Caleb Hart," the man said quietly. "You always did pick inconvenient places to lie low." Caleb's shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Marcus Cole," he replied. "You're a long way from D.C." Marcus smiled thinly. "So are you." Marcus Cole had once worn the same uniform as Caleb, Navy intelligence before, transferring to the FBI, where he now worked organized crime and long-term investigations. He had the look of someone who slept too little and trusted even less. Years earlier, an operation in Eastern Europe had gone wrong, costing 2 lives and hardening Marcus into a man who preferred preparation over heroics. Ellie came down the stairs, hair still damp from a rushed shower, sweater hanging loose on her frame. She stopped when she saw Marcus. "Who is this?" "An old friend," Caleb said, "and probably the only person who doesn't answer to Pierce." Marcus's eyes flicked to Ash, taking in the bandage, then to the boarded-up rear window. "Looks like I'm late." Ellie crossed her arms. "You knew this would happen?" Marcus shook his head. "I knew Pierce would respond eventually. I didn't expect him to move this fast." He turned back to Caleb. "But it confirms something." Caleb gestured toward the chair. "Talk." Marcus sat, folding his hands. "Miles, Pierce runs more than docks and unions. Shipping gives him cover, not income. We've been tracking a secondary operation for years. Illegal wildlife transport moving through the port under falsified manifests. Protected species, exotic animals, high value, low visibility." He paused. "Your son kicked the wrong dog," he added dryly, glancing at Ellie. Ellie stared at him. "He's involved in animal trafficking?" Marcus nodded. "Indirectly, but that makes him careless, and carelessness creates evidence." Caleb leaned back slightly. "What do you need?" Marcus met his gaze. "Proof. Something concrete enough that local pressure doesn't make it disappear. Records, access, a mistake." Ellie shook her head. "This isn't our problem anymore. I won't let my clinic become a battleground." Marcus looked at her carefully. "With respect, it already is." Silence followed that, heavy and uncomfortable. Ash shifted and let out a low huff, as if irritated by the tension. Ellie knelt beside him, running her fingers through the thick fur along his neck. He leaned into the touch, steadying her. "I can't fight them," she said quietly. "I fix animals. That's all I do." Caleb's voice was calm. "And that's why you matter." Marcus stood and walked to the window, peering through the blinds. "Pierce won't escalate again immediately. Last night was a probe. Next comes leverage." Ellie's stomach tightened. "What kind of leverage?" Marcus turned back. "You." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Not happening." "Then you move first," Marcus said, "before he decides patience isn't working." The plan took shape slowly, carefully. No raids, no confrontations. Marcus would feed Caleb limited access, shipping schedules, storage locations that had raised flags but never crossed the threshold for warrants. Caleb would observe, document, find the weak point. Ellie would stay out of sight as much as possible. "I won't." "Leave Ash," Ellie said flatly. "No one's asking you to," Caleb replied. That afternoon, Marcus left quietly, blending back into the city. Caleb watched him go, aware that the moment they acted, there would be no turning back. 2 days passed without incident. Ellie reopened the clinic on a limited basis. A few regulars came in, an elderly woman with a terrier named Mabel, a delivery driver with a limping shepherd mix. Ellie kept her voice steady, her hands sure. To anyone watching, life looked normal. It wasn't. Caleb spent his nights walking the neighborhood, learning its rhythms. Which lights stayed on, which cars lingered too long. Ash accompanied him on short walks, limping but determined, his presence both comfort and warning. On the third night, the message arrived. Ellie returned from the supply room to find the front door unlocked. A man stood inside, near the reception desk. He was tall and broad, late 30s perhaps, with a thick beard and heavy brow that cast his eyes in shadow. His head was shaved close, scars tracing faint lines along his forearms where his sleeves were rolled back. He wore a dark hoodie and gloves, casual but deliberate. His name was Evan Rourke. Rourke had once worked port security, fired after reporting irregularities that went nowhere. Since then, he survived on contract work and grudges. He smiled rarely and trusted no one. "I wouldn't call the police," he said calmly. "If I were you—" Ellie didn't scream. She didn't move. "Who are you?" "Someone who doesn't like Pierce," Rourke replied, "and someone who knows he's about to tighten the noose." Caleb stepped out from the back, positioning himself between Rourke and Ellie. "You've got 10 seconds. Rourke raised his hands. "Fair enough." He glanced at Ash. "Dog's tougher than he looks." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "You were there." "Not that day," Rourke said, "but I've been watching since." He placed a folded document on the desk. "Pierce's next shipment arrives in 48 hours. Officially, it's frozen seafood. Unofficially, it's alive. If you want proof, that's your window." Caleb studied him. "Why help?" Rourke's jaw tightened. Because when I tried to do the right thing, I lost my job. And when I kept quiet, I lost my stomach for myself. He stepped back toward the door. I won't be back. He left as quietly as he'd arrived. Ellie sank into the nearest chair. This is getting worse. Caleb nodded. Yes. Ash limped over and rested his head against her knee. She placed her hand on his head, grounding herself again. Outside, the city continued on, unaware. But somewhere between the docks and the clinic, lines were being crossed. And this time, the choice was no longer whether to stand. It was how far. The port of Seattle looked different at night. By day it was loud, mechanical, and exposed. Cranes swinging like long-necked animals above stacked containers, forklifts weaving through narrow lanes, men shouting over engines. After midnight, it became something else entirely. The noise faded. The scale remained. Floodlights cast hard white cones across concrete, leaving deep shadows between steel walls. Water lapped quietly against the piers, carrying the smell of salt, oil, and rust. Caleb watched from the edge of a warehouse roof 2 blocks away, body pressed low against the cold surface. He wore dark clothing that blended easily into the night, nothing tactical enough to draw attention, nothing casual enough to slow him down. His movements were deliberate, measured, shaped by years of learning when to move and when not to. Below him, the harbor shifted in patterns that looked random to most people, but weren't. Ash stayed behind. Ellie had argued quietly but firmly. Ash was healing, and the docks were not a place for a dog with cracked ribs. In the end, Ash had accepted it, resting his heavy head against Ellie's leg, as if memorizing the shape of her. Caleb had knelt in front of him before leaving, pressing his forehead briefly against the Malamutes. "Hold the line," he'd said. Ash had understood. Now Caleb was alone. Evan Rourke's information had been precise. Dock 17 Container Group C. Arrival window between 1:30 and 2 a.m. Official paperwork listed frozen seafood from Southeast Asia. The shipping company was a Pierce subsidiary, layers deep, clean on paper. Too clean. Caleb moved along the roof edge and dropped schwanzly into the shadow behind a row of parked trailers. He adjusted his pace to the environment, avoiding open ground, using noise when it worked in his favor. A passing truck masked his footsteps. Steam venting from a pipe hid his silhouette. He reached the perimeter fence and slipped through a maintenance gap Rourke had marked earlier that evening. Inside the port, security patrols moved on predictable routes. That alone told him something. Pierce liked control. Control bred routine. Near Dock 17, a small office trailer sat elevated on concrete blocks. Its lights were off, but a generator hummed faintly behind it. 2 men stood nearby, smoking. One leaned against a railing, tall and narrow, his beard long and unkempt, eyes half-lidded with boredom. The other was shorter, heavier, his shaved head gleaming under the floodlights. They carried themselves with lazy confidence, hands never straying far from their belts. Caleb waited. When they turned away from each other at the same time, he moved. The first man never saw him. Caleb closed the distance quickly, clamping a hand over the man's mouth while driving an elbow into his diaphragm. The air left his lungs in a rush, his knees buckling. Caleb lowered him gently to the ground, applying pressure until he went limp. The second man reached for his radio. Caleb struck his wrist sharply, knocking the device away, then swept the man's legs out from under him. A controlled blow to the side of the neck ended the struggle. No shouting, no alarms. Caleb dragged them into shadow and secured them with zip ties, positioning their bodies where they wouldn't be found quickly. Then he turned his attention to the containers. He moved along the row, checking numbers against the list Marcus had provided. The third container from the end matched. Its exterior looked no different from the others. Corrugated steel, faded paint, a standard lock. What caught Caleb's attention was the sound. Faint, almost lost beneath the harbor's ambient noise. Scratching. He positioned himself at the container door and slipped a small flashlight from his pocket, covering the lens with his fingers, so only a thin beam escaped. He cut the lock cleanly and pulled the door open just enough to look inside. The beam caught eyes first. Multiple sets. Reflective. Panicked. Cages were stacked 3 high, secured poorly to the container walls. Inside them were animals that did not belong there. A pair of young snow leopards pressed against each other in the far corner, their breathing shallow, their coats dulled by confinement. Closer to the door, 2 macaws clung to the bars of a small cave, feathers ruffled, eyes wild. In another crate, something larger shifted, metal creaking under its weight. Caleb closed the door quietly. His jaw tightened. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was proof. He moved away from the container and toward the office trailer. The door was locked, but the lock was cheap. He opened it easily and stepped inside. The space was cramped, cluttered with paperwork, a folding desk, and an old computer humming softly. The air smelled of stale coffee and damp insulation. Caleb powered on the computer. It was password protected, but not well. He bypassed it quickly and began copying files onto a flash drive Marcus had given him earlier that day. Shipping manifests, payment logs, contact lists, photos, time compressed. Footsteps sounded outside. Voices followed. 2 men approaching, one complaining about the cold, the other about being called in late. Caleb didn't have time to exit cleanly. He shut down the computer and slipped behind a metal cabinet just as the door opened. The men entered casually. One was tall, broad-shouldered, his beard thick and braided loosely at the chin. His face was scarred, the result of a past that involved more fists than words. His name was Grant Wilkes, though most people called him Wilkes. He had been Pierce's enforcer for nearly a decade, loyal, not out of fear, but habit. The second man was younger, nervous, checking his phone repeatedly. Wilkes noticed the cabinet slightly out of place. "You moved that?" he asked. The younger man frowned. "No." Caleb acted. He surged forward, striking the younger man first, driving him into the desk hard enough to knock him unconscious. Wilkes reacted instantly, swinging a heavy fist that Caleb barely avoided. The 2 men collided, grappling in the narrow space, metal clanging as they hit the wall. Wilkes was strong, stronger than most. His beard brushed Caleb's cheek as he leaned in, teeth clenched. "You don't belong here," he growled. Caleb didn't argue. He shifted his weight and drove a knee into Wilkes's midsection, then followed with a sharp strike to the temple. Wilkes staggered but stayed upright. Caleb finished it with a clean, controlled blow to the neck. Wilkes collapsed, unconscious but breathing. Alarms began to sound outside. Caleb didn't hesitate. He grabbed the flash drive, smashed the office window with a chair, and climbed out. Shouts echoed across the dock. Flashlights cut through the darkness. He ran, not blindly, not panicked. He moved along routes he'd already mapped, using container stacks for cover, doubling back when necessary. A guard fired once, the bow, bullets sparking off steel near his head. Caleb didn't slow. He reached the fence and slipped through just as sirens grew louder behind him. He didn't look back. By the time he returned to the clinic, dawn was breaking. Ellie was waiting, eyes red with worry. She stood as soon as he entered. "You're bleeding." Caleb glanced down. A shallow cut along his forearm, nothing serious. "I'm fine." He handed her the flash drive. "This isn't." Ellie stared at it, then at him. "What did you find?" "Enough." Ash stirred from his mat and pushed himself upright, tail wagging weakly. Caleb knelt and rested his forehead against the dog's. "We're close," he murmured. Outside, the city woke unaware, but the harbor would not forget what had been taken from it that night. The city felt different once the evidence existed. Seattle woke under a pale morning sky, clouds stretched thin and colorless, the rain finally giving the streets a brief reprieve. Traffic returned to its usual rhythm, cafes opened, ferries crossed the bay as they always did. To most people, nothing had changed. To Caleb, everything had. The flash drive sat on the clinic's small stainless steel table, no larger than a thumb, its presence heavier than any weapon. Ellie watched it as if it might move on its own. Ash lay nearby, resting but alert, his ribs still wrapped, his breathing steady. He was improving, but not healed. None of them were. Caleb hadn't slept. Again. He stood at the counter, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. "You'll have it within the hour," he said. "Full copy. Originals untouched." Marcus Cole's voice crackled through the speaker. "Good. Don't move it around. Pierce will feel the shift before we make it public." Caleb ended the call and set the phone down. Ellie leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly. "You're sure this is enough?" "It's more than enough," Caleb replied. "It's motive, method, and proof." That was when Ash growled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was the sound he made when something was wrong. Caleb turned toward the front windows. A white utility van idled across the street, engine running, hazard lights off. It didn't belong to any of the nearby businesses. The driver's silhouette sat too still. Ellie followed his gaze. "Do you think—" "Yes," Caleb said. The van doors opened. 4 men stepped out. They moved fast, not trying to hide anymore. The moment for subtlety had passed. The first man was tall and broad, his shoulders thick beneath a dark jacket, beard heavy and untrimmed, face set in a permanent scowl. He walked with confidence born of repetition. His name was Isaac Dunn, and he had spent most of his adult life enforcing other people's will. Years earlier, a bar fight had left him with a shattered cheekbone and a crooked smile. Since then, violence had become simpler than words. Behind him came two younger men, both athletic, clean-cut, their expressions tight with focus. They wore gloves despite the mild weather. The fourth man stayed back near the van, thinner, older, eyes scanning the street. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to report. "Stay with Ash," Caleb said. Ellie didn't argue. She moved instinctively, positioning herself beside the dog, one hand resting on his neck. Ash rose slowly, placing himself between her and the door despite the pain. The glass shattered before the lock gave. The front door exploded inward, fragments scattering across the floor. Dunn entered first, moving low, aggressive, eyes already searching. "Find it," he barked. "Don't screw around." Caleb stepped out from behind the counter. The first punch came fast. Dunn swung wide, aiming to overwhelm. Caleb slipped inside the arc and drove a forearm into Dunn's throat, forcing him back a step. The impact was solid, efficient. Dunn recovered quickly, spitting, eyes burning. One of the younger men rushed in from the side. Caleb pivoted, catching him with a sharp elbow to the jaw. The man went down hard, sliding across the floor. The second younger man hesitated. That hesitation cost him. Caleb closed the distance, took his legs out, and pinned him long enough to remove him from the fight. Dunn roared and charged. They collided near the exam table, metal rattling as Dunn drove Caleb backward with brute strength. Dunn was heavier, fueled by anger and purpose. Caleb adjusted, using leverage instead of force, shifting his weight, redirecting momentum. A knee to the ribs slowed Dunn. A short strike to the temple finished it. Dunn collapsed, unconscious but breathing. The fourth man bolted. Caleb didn't chase him. Sirens wailed in the distance, louder than before. This time, they weren't coincidence. Ellie stood frozen, chest heaving. Ash barked once, sharp and victorious, then settled, leaning into her. Caleb wiped blood from his lip. "They won't try that again." Ellie's voice shook. "That means they'll try something worse." She was right. The call came less than an hour later. Caleb answered without speaking. Miles Pierce's voice was calm, almost polite. "You have something that belongs to me." "You mean the animals," Caleb replied, "or the records." A pause, then a quiet exhale. "You've forced my hand." Caleb said nothing. "Check your back alley," Pierce continued. 5 minutes. The line went dead. Caleb moved immediately. He took the back stairs 2 at a time and burst into the alley behind the clinic. Ellie followed. A car was parked there now, black, doors open, and on the wet pavement beside it lay Ash. Ellie screamed. Ash was alive, barely. Blood matted the fur near his ear. His body trembled as he struggled to lift his head. Caleb dropped to his knees beside him instantly, hands moving, checking airway, pressure points, breathing. Ellie knelt on the other side, sobbing openly now, hands shaking as she pressed against Ash's side. "No, no, no." Caleb applied pressure to the wound. "He's alive," he said firmly. "Stay with me." Ash's eyes flicked toward Ellie, his tail twitched weakly. Footsteps echoed from the alley entrance. A man stood there, alone. He was older, late 40s, lean, his hair shaved close, beard trimmed precisely. His face was lined, his eyes tired. This was Thomas Keller, Pierce's fixer. He had once been a public defender, idealistic and stubborn, until a case gone wrong cost him his career and his marriage. Since then, he had sold his intelligence to men like Pierce, telling himself it was survival. Keller held up one hand. "This isn't personal," he said quietly. "It's leverage." Caleb stood slowly. "You hurt a dog." Keller's jaw tightened. "I didn't order that." "But you allowed it," Ellie snapped through tears. Keller met her gaze and looked away. "Pierce wants the drive," he said. "Meet him tonight. Old steel foundry by the river. Come alone." Caleb stepped closer. "And if I don't?" Keller swallowed. "Next time, it won't be the dog." He turned and walked away. Caleb watched him go, rage cold and steady in his chest. Back inside, Ellie worked frantically, stopping the bleeding, stabilizing Ash with shaking hands that refused to fail. Caleb assisted, silent. focused. When it was done, Ash lay breathing steadily again, alive but broken. Ellie sank to the floor beside him. "This is my fault." Caleb knelt in front of her. "No, this is theirs." His phone buzzed. "Marcus, we can move now. Say the word." Caleb looked at Ash, at Ellie. "No," he typed back. "Not yet." He stood and retrieved his jacket. Ellie looked up, fear and resolve mixing in her eyes. "What are you doing?" Caleb's voice was low. "I'm ending this." Outside, the clouds gathered again, thick and heavy. The city was holding its breath, and the final line had been crossed. The old steel foundry sat along the river, like a relic that refused to collapse. Rust streaked the brick walls, and broken windows stared out over dark water that moved without sound. Floodlights hummed weakly along the perimeter, throwing long shadows across cracked concrete. The city kept its distance from this place. Tonight, it felt deliberate. Caleb arrived on foot, parking several blocks away and approaching through alleys and service roads. He wore a plain jacket, jeans, nothing that marked him as anything other than another man moving through the industrial edge of Seattle. In his pocket, wrapped in plastic, was the flash drive. In his mind, the layout of the building had already been drawn and redrawn. Inside the foundry, Miles Pierce waited. He stood near the center of the main floor beneath a hanging crane, hands clasped behind his back, posture straight despite the cold. The overhead lights cast sharp lines across his face, accentuating the angles of his jaw and the deep lines around his eyes. He wore a dark overcoat, tailored and immaculate, silver hair neatly combed back, beard trimmed close. He looked calm. He always did. Two men stood with him. One was tall and lean, his beard streaked with gray, eyes hard and observant. The other was broader, younger, his head shaved, arms crossed over a thick chest. Both carried themselves like men who expected violence and were prepared for it. Pierce looked up as Caleb entered. "You came alone," he said, as if pleased. Caleb stopped several feet away. "You hurt the dog." Pierce sighed, almost weary. "That was not my instruction." "But you let it happen," Caleb replied. Pierce studied him for a long moment. "You don't understand leverage," he said. "You forced me into a corner." Caleb pulled the flash drive from his pocket and held it up. "This ends tonight." Pierce's eyes flicked to it. "Give it to me." "No." Pierce nodded once, a small gesture. One of the guards shifted. His stance. That was when the sound echoed through the building. Boots, many of them. Shouts followed, sharp and authoritative. Floodlights flared brighter as doors at the far end of the foundry burst open. "Federal agents, don't move!" Marcus Cole entered first, wearing a dark jacket with FBI lettering across the chest, weapon raised but steady. His face was set, eyes focused. Behind him came a full tactical team, moving with controlled precision, weapons trained, voices calm and loud. Pierce's composure cracked for the first time. "You lied," he said to Caleb. Caleb didn't answer. Pierce turned toward Marcus. "This is a mistake," he said. "I want my lawyer." Marcus stepped forward. "You'll get one," he said, "after we finish cataloging what you've been hiding." Agents moved quickly, securing the guards, sweeping the building. One called out confirmations over the radio. Another produced a warrant, already signed. Pierce stood very still as handcuffs closed around his wrists. The metal clicked softly, final and unmistakable. As they led him away, he looked back at Caleb. "You think this makes you a hero?" he asked quietly. Caleb met his gaze. "No." Pierce was escorted out, his power evaporating with each step toward the waiting vehicles. The foundry emptied as quickly as it had filled. Marcus approached Caleb, lowering his weapon. "We've got everything we need," he said. "Shipping records, live cargo, money trails. It's over." Caleb nodded. "Good." Marcus hesitated. "You could have handled this differently." Caleb looked toward the open doors, toward the river beyond. So could he. By the time Caleb returned to the clinic, dawn was breaking. Ellie was already awake. She sat on the floor beside Ash, who lay wrapped in blankets, an IV drip set carefully beside him. His breathing was slow and steady. When Caleb entered, Ash lifted his head weakly and wagged his tail once. Ellie looked up. Her eyes were red, but clear. "Is it over?" "Yes," Caleb said. "It's done." She let out a breath she'd been holding for days and leaned forward, pressing her forehead briefly to Ash's. Her hands moved automatically, checking bandages, listening to his breathing. "He's stable," she said. "He'll recover." Caleb knelt beside them. He rested a hand on Ash's neck, feeling the warmth, the steady pulse beneath thick fur. "You held the line," he murmured. Ash's tail thumped again. Later that morning, the news broke. Miles Pierce was arrested on multiple federal charges, including trafficking protected wildlife, conspiracy, and obstruction. Several associates were taken into custody. The docks were shut down pending investigation. For the first time in years, the port was quiet. Ellie watched the report from the small television mounted in the clinic corner. She turned it off before the commentators finished speculating. "I don't want to hear about him anymore." Caleb smiled faintly. "You won't have to." The days that followed were slow, careful. Ash improved steadily, stubborn as ever, insisting on standing before he should, eating with enthusiasm the moment he was allowed. Ellie stayed close, sleeping in the clinic, hands never far from him. Caleb stayed too. One afternoon, as sunlight finally broke through the clouds and warmed the front windows, Ellie leaned against the counter and looked at him. "What happens now?" Caleb considered the question. "I have to report back," he said. "Soon," she nodded. "And after?" He looked at Ash, now sitting upright, ears alert, watching a bird outside the window. "After," Caleb said slowly, "I come back." Ellie smiled, small but real. "Good." Ash barked once, sharp and approving. That evening, as the city settled into something close to peace, Caleb locked up the clinic and stepped outside. The air was cool but clear. Seattle, for the first time since they'd met, felt lighter. He looked back through the window. Ellie sat on the floor beside Ash, laughing softly as he nudged her hand. Caleb turned toward the street, already planning the road ahead. Some fights ended with silence. Some ended with a future. This one had given them both. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or fire. They arrive quietly, in the form of a stranger who steps in, a dog who refuses to back down, or a moment when fear does not get the final word. This story is not about strength alone. It is about presence, about the kind of courage God places in ordinary hearts when the innocent are threatened. The Bible tells us that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and sometimes He answers prayers not by removing the danger, but by sending a protector through it. In our daily lives, we may never face violence like this, but every day someone near us feels afraid. A child who feels unseen, an animal with no voice, a neighbor quietly struggling behind closed doors. And maybe, just maybe, God is asking us the same question today. Will you be the one who steps in? If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below and tell us where you were watching from. We read everyone. And if you believe love, faith, and quiet courage still matter in this world, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this. Before you go, let us say a short prayer together. May God place His hand of protection over you and your loved ones. May He guard your heart when you feel afraid, give you strength when you feel small, and surround you with peace when the world feels heavy. May He bless your home, your family, and every creature you care for. And may you never forget that even in the darkest moments, you are never alone. Amen.